What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to Celio's Network. Today we're doing a metagame analysis as of September 28th, 2021 in the Sword and Shield through Evolving Skies format. I've been getting requests to do more in-depth metagame analysis, and I do feel like I've been trying to appeal and help the beginner to intermediate audience a little more in the recent uploads. So let's take a deep dive into the current metagame of the Pokemon TCG's standard format. Of course, before we get into it, shout out to my lovely sponsors, PotownStore.com and PokemonCard.io. You can use code Celio for 5% off over at PotownStore.com on PTCGO codes, and I'll be featuring all of my lists here, and you can find all of my lists at PokemonCard.io. Link is in the description down below. This video will feature the following contents. We'll talk about the popular decks. Why are the popular decks being played? Which I think is a question a lot of people come to me with about some of the popular decks. 3, the most successful decks, according to statistics and data and analysis by other content creators. 4, the checks and balances that keep any of these decks from being oppressive as of now. 5, how and why are lists changing and adapting. And 6, my metagame predictions of what might happen in the next few weeks or so. So let's get into it with the popular decks. Here are the 10 most popular archetypes according to play.limitlesstcg.com, which is where all of these events are actually being held. These are where the tournaments are being played. So this is the data of 88 tournaments with 7,844 entries and over 20,000 matches played, and these are the counts of the archetypes that are the most popular in the Evolving Skies standard format. So Azashin, Dragapult, Single Strike, Rapidstrike, Urshifu, Suicune, Shadowrider, Sylveon Rapidstrike, Leafeon, Ice Rider Cali, and Jolteon are the top 10 that we'll look at as the most popular decks. So Azashin, why is Azashin Zamazenta being played? Well, it is cheap, so therefore accessible. It's a deck that people have already played in past formats in some shape or form, whether that was Luke Metal, ADPZ, or Turbo Azashin. So it's a deck people have cards for and experience with. And Zamazenta V is a good card because it's something that people don't want to necessarily tech for in the beginning stages of a metagame. So I think all of these things made it be very popular and also successful, partially because the cards are strong and partially because of how popular it was. And probably also a part goes to the strength of the players piloting these Azashin Zamazenta variants. So plenty of reasons why this has been being played so much and also seeing success, but I do think lists that are becoming more ironed out and piloted better and more lists and decks are being created and discovered. Azashin Zamazenta, its days are numbered as other decks get stronger, because I do think Azashin Zamazenta has a cap to how good it can be right now, and its popularity and accessibility and familiarity that players had with it was carrying it since Evolving Skies came out. Next is Dragapult VMAX. Dragapult VMAX is being played partially because Henry Brand played it, and he won the first big event that we had on Play Limitless in this format with Dragapult VMAX. But Dragapult VMAX is played because it hits Rapidstrike Urshifu and Single Strike Urshifu for weakness, and it resists Fighting type. And we went into this format thinking that Rapidstrike Urshifu VMAX would be the end-all be-all of everything, because that's what the Twitterverse and the echo chambers that everybody, oh, this format's solved already, we haven't played it. Rapidstrike Urshifu VMAX is too strong. Dragapult VMAX came in and kind of scared Rapidstrike Urshifu VMAX away a little bit. Also, the combination of Marnie plus Path to the Peak is quite strong, and Dragapult VMAX just kind of preys on every deck that's using the Sobble, Drizzile, and Teleon engine in the early games, because with a Zigzagoon ping and then some Max Phantom counters, you can be taking out Sobbles each turn, while damaging the active Pokemon, of course. And if it's Rapidstrike Urshifu, hitting it for a lot of damage and resisting the damage it's hitting back to it. Also, Dragapult VMAX doesn't need any support from two prizers on the bench, so there's nothing for the decks that are weak to it to really go around and hit. You have to deal with the Dragapult VMAX, which is nice for Dragapult. Single Strike Urshifu Umbreon has emerged as a top deck of the format and also very popular. I think this deck has plenty of reasons to be played. Single Strike Urshifu VMAX can hit through anything, so there's no hard counter for it. Decidueye and Zamazenta are not going to wall it off. And then Single Strike Urshifu V and VMAX both hit a lot of damage and fighting weakness. So it's good against anything weak to fighting, obviously, like Jolteon VMAX. Umbreon VMAX has a lot going for it as well. It has the ability to gust something up, which is very aggressive, and that's something that Single Strike Urshifu was missing in the last format, also missing a backup attacker. Umbreon VMAX hits Dragapult and Shadowrider Calirex for weakness. Now, we thought Shadowrider Calirex VMAX would be very popular and very strong, so we already knew about that, but it turns out Umbreon VMAX also helps out against Dragapult VMAX, so just a very strong set of cards all around here. And it doesn't have an exact hard counter. It does have something that keeps it in check, in my opinion, aside from its consistency, which I think is just slightly below a lot of the other top decks, but we'll talk about that more when we get into the more analytical part of this video. Next is Rapidstrike Urshifu VMAX, and this is a very vanilla build of it with no partners. I do have lists on PokemonCard.io that I've made with Zeraora V and Galarian Moltres V, each as partners with Rapidstrike Urshifu, and Rapidstrike Urshifu is thrown into the boxes with Sylveon and Blaziken as well, but this is a straightforward Rapidstrike Urshifu Inteleon build. Now, this is a very strong deck because G-Max Rapid Flow can take out your opponent's support Pokemon. If you go first and have a turn 2 Rapid Flow and take out both of your opponent's Sobbles or both of their Minchinos or Remoraid's or whatever it is that your opponent is using, their Houndours in a single strike deck, that's incredibly strong, and your opponent might not be able to come back from that, or at least it might take them a couple of turns to come back from it, and by the time they do that, you can Gale Thrust a couple times or even set up another G-Max Rapid Flow. So Rapidstrike Urshifu really targets down all of these decks that are playing these single prize support Pokemon. Of course, Rapidstrike Urshifu is kept in check by its psychic weakness, which we see that there are many strong psychic Pokemon out there, like Dragapult VMAX and Shadowrider. Next, we have Suicune Ludicolo. So Suicune V is a very strong card. It's very, very efficient, just like Azashin is, in the way that it has a low energy attack, just 2 energy, and it can do a maximum of 220 without Ludicolo. It has an ability that draws cards. It's water type. It synergizes well with Melanie and Capacious Bucket. Its attack has a colorless in its energy cost, so that means Capture Energy works with it. It's a basic V, so Cape of Toughness works with it. It has a lot going for it. There's a lot of support for it between Melanie, Capture Energy, Cape, etc., and it has a built-in little bit of draw each turn. So all of that combined makes it a very good attacker. It's a 2-prize Pokemon in what we entered as a 3-prize based format, and I'd still say it's a 3-prize based format that 2 prizers can take advantage of. And Ludicolo, upon evolution, allows you to do 100 more damage with your basic Pokemon's attacks to then reach up to that 320 damage mark to one-shot most VMAXs with Suicune V and ping up to the 330s and 340s that some VMAXs have as HP. So this is a very strong deck, and I think it is played a lot because it's a 2-prizer deck that can outtrade 3-prizers. And it can also outtrade other 2-prizers because Suicune only needs 2 energy to attack, and even if your opponent limits their bench, you can still reach the numbers you need to with the help of Chilling Reign Inteleon and Ludicolo. We have Shadowrider here, and this Shadowrider Alchemy list is going to look pretty similar to lists from the previous formats, but there are people experimenting without the Alchemy VMAX, and there are also some alchemy lists that don't play Shadowrider. Now, I feel pretty uncomfortable with each of those because if you're playing against a metal deck, you have Shadowrider as your main attacker. If you're playing against a dark deck, you can just leave alchemy in the active and never attack with Shadowrider. So I do think they complement each other well, aside from the fact that alchemy and Shadowrider both get energy onto the board and want energy on the board. That's at the base level. Of course, they synergize, but they also have different weaknesses to take care of different opposing Pokemon that might be across the board. I think it's played because Shadowrider Alchemy, without, let's just say that it's not being kept in check by the weaknesses on the cards. Incredibly powerful Pokemon. They can one-shot anything. Shadowrider draws cards, accelerates energy, and can do an uncapped amount of damage. So these cards are just incredibly inherently powerful, and that at the base of it is why it's being played. And then in the earlier tournaments, it was being played at higher numbers to kind of feed off of all the Rapidstrike Urshifu that we expected. Sylveon Moltres Urshifu is just a Sylveon box style deck I chose to feature for this video, but Sylveon VMAX archetype in general has been being played a lot. And I think it's being played because it allows players to build their deck the way they want it to be. It's a very versatile card because it has the Rapidstrike tag and it has a completely colorless energy cost for the attack that you'll be using. So Sylveon VMAX hits Urshifu, both rapid and single, for weakness, and it can use Rapidstrike energy, capture energy, dark energy, whatever, fighting energy, whatever it is that you want to use to satisfy that max harmony. So that means you can pair it with Zeraora, Blaziken, Moltres, Urshifu, Vaporeon. There's a lot that you can do with it and pick and choose which matchups you want to have a better time against. With Sylveon VMAX or Blaziken VMAX as the base of your deck, getting help from multiple different support and other attackers. So this deck is being played because you can build it how you want to, and you can more or less pick which matchups you want to go into with an advantage based on the typing that you're picking to play in your deck. Leafeon VMAX is being played because it's a consistent deck that allows you to accelerate energy on turn 1 with the Greening Cells ability, and I feel like as long as this deck gets your Leafeon V onto the board, which you have 4 Leafeon Vs, 4 Quick Balls, and 4 Capture Energy, and there's 9 basic Pokemon in this deck, and 4 out of 9 of those are a Leafeon V, so you also have that chance of starting out with it. As long as you can start with that Leafeon and get your turn 1 Greening Cells, you're already off to a nice start with this Leafeon VMAX archetype. Aside from the consistency that I think it has because of Greening Cells and because of Capture Energy, and also being fairly low maintenance, just needing 2 attachments or even just 1 manual attachment if you used Greening Cells on turn 1. It's also good against Single Strike Urshifu Umbreon because you hit Umbreon VMAX for weakness, and Single Strike Urshifu VMAX has 3 retreat cost, so with Galar Mine, Grass Knot's hitting for 300. So this is a deck that hits hard, it hits consistently, it lends well to using the Inteleon Drizzile engine, as you'll see a lot of the top decks are using that. And I do feel like it's one of the smooth, consistent decks that doesn't really need a lot to do what it has to do each turn, which is appealing to players. Calirex, Ice Rider Calirex, Suicune V. I think this is another very smooth deck, and that's why it's played. It's also pretty aggressive, which is another reason for Leafeon as well. These are both VMAX decks that can play the turn 2 boss up a V and knock it out kind of strategy. And that's kind of what Ice Rider Calirex VMAX was scaring players a lot about going into this format. The potential of turn 2 just boss up a V, knock it out with Max Lance. That's not always what you're going to want to do, but sometimes that is a good option. Ice Rider Cali and Suicune both have different weaknesses, much like Alchemy and Shadowrider do. So against Jolteon decks, you can focus on using Ice Rider. Against Metal decks, you can focus on using Suicune. Now, I do build this list heavy into the Suicune with 3 Suicunes and also 2 Capes of Toughness. And I think just the 3-2 Ice Rider Calirex VMAX is enough in the general game. You don't always need a second Ice Rider Calirex VMAX. Sometimes just 1 is enough. You can use 2 Suicunes and an Ice Rider VMAX. Sometimes you'll use that second Ice Rider VMAX to try to force them to knock out a VMAX to finish the game. This deck also does Marnie Path pretty well because you just kind of want to play a Melanie one turn and then a Marnie one turn and a Melanie one turn, work a boss into there when you need to. But when you can Marnie Path, your deck really just needs to have its energy attached. So if you already have your energy, Marnie Path is good to go. You're low maintenance. All that matters is maybe you disrupted your opponent as well. So an deck of efficient attackers with that Suicune V and then the 2 energy Ice Rider attacks as well. Runs consistently with the Inteleon engine and has the potential for disruption with the Marnie Path plays as well. Jolteon VMAX is a deck that I really loved in early testing, but I didn't really put too much hope into or talk about it too much because I just assumed that the format would be too overridden with Rapidstrike Urshifu to even consider this as a competitive viable option. That is not the case, however, and Rapidstrike Urshifu VMAX has been kept in check, and Single Strike Urshifu VMAX is starting to seem like it might end up being a little bit of a problem with the power that Umbreon VMAX adds to it, but still Jolteon VMAX is incredibly playable, and one of the most played and most well-performing decks has been Suicune Ludicolo, which Suicune has an awful time against Jolteon VMAX, as well does the Azashin Zamazenta deck, since Jolteon VMAX can heal the damage done to it by those Pokemon and use Path to the Peak to go through Zamazenta. So Jolteon VMAX actually found itself in a pretty good metagame here, at least for a little while, and I'm sure it will be sticking around in the metagame as we go on in some capacity. So now that we've got the popular decks out of the way, these are how those decks have been performing. These are some statistics analyzed and organized by Cash. I will link his Twitter in the description of this video. Cash is a part of PokeStats, and definitely follow him on Twitter because he puts out a bunch of helpful information like this. But you'll see he organized it with the data from these tournaments over on the right for the week of September 20th through the 26th, and organized it by the points that these decks earned, or pretty much the top 8 and up performances that they earned. So from top to bottom, the top 10 earning decks based on placements in these tournaments that Cash held at a kind of a higher ranking of validity. Like, he counted these tournaments specifically. Single Strike Urshifu VMAX Umbreon at the first place, then Dragapult VMAX not too far behind, and then there's a big dip down you'll see in the CP earnings down to Jolteon VMAX, Azashin decks, Ice Rider, Suicune Ludicolo, and Leafeon VMAX. From there, there's another dip down to the last 3 of the top 10, which are Sylveon VMAX decks, Rapidstrike Urshifu decks, and Shadowrider Calirex VMAX decks, with Victini VMAX not too far behind. And then there's a very large dip after Victini VMAX. So Victini VMAX is kind of the floor to the top performing decks here, according to Cash's data and how he's organized it. Then we have another similar set of data organized here in a different way by Justin Basil. So check out justinbasil.com. He has a lot of great information and resources on there. He also does prospective set lists when we know a set is coming out, but we don't know what cards from Japan are going to be in the set. He does deck lists, a lot of that stuff. So definitely give justinbasil.com a little bit of a check if you have some time and you're interested in some more resources for Pokemon TCG. So these are the top archetypes according to his data from September 20, all results from September 13th up to September 27th. There we go. It's just a little backwards. So 13th of September to the September 27th. And this is based on top 8 placements with standard formats of 50 players or more, quite similar to Cash's. But you'll see here, it just goes back an extra week or two prior to when Cash's was, since his was just a weekly update. So this has Dragapult VMAX being the top according to top 8 performances, and then Umbreon VMAX, and then Suicune Ludicolo, Jolteon VMAX, Azashin V, Sylveon VMAX, Rapidstrike Urshi, and Leafeon. Looking at the top 8 decks here according to Justin's data analysis. So this one might be a little messy, but stick with me. If you've made it through this far in the video, this is what you're probably here for. You're here for the what is he talking about kind of stuff, that deeper meta analysis. So don't worry, we'll take away some of these arrows in just a moment. Let me explain myself. This is what it looks like in my head. Okay, we have these top 10 archetypes that have shown themselves as consistently performing, consistently played by people, top archetypes in our current standard format. The green arrows are the match. All the arrows are representing where the arrow comes from and where it goes is a good matchup for where the arrow is going. You'll see the lone arrow coming from Sylveon VMAX going to Rapidstrike Urshifu VMAX represents a good matchup for Sylveon VMAX decks against Rapidstrike Urshifu VMAX decks. I hope that helps you understand what these arrows mean. It just means that the deck the arrow is coming from has a good matchup against the deck that the arrow is going to. Not all decks have arrows going from them, but all decks have arrows going to them. So these are all the top decks, and these arrows are how I see the matchups that matter, and the matchups that are very favored for a deck or unfavored for that same matter. So let's say in the data from trainerhill.com, which shout out trainerhill.com. Let's say in that data that Ice Rider Calirex has like a 54% matchup versus Leafeon. I didn't really put an arrow to that because I don't see that as a black and white favored matchup. So these are kind of like the matchups I view as like 60% plus in favor of one of the decks. But the red matchups are the ones that I think are kind of holding this meta together, or at least keeping it where it is or progressing it where it's going to. I think the red arrows are the important matchups that actually are shaping our metagame. And I say that because I think these are the ones that are the checks and balances of the metagame that we have here. Rapidstrike Urshifu VMAX and Shadowrider Calirex VMAX are decks that we thought were going to be very, very powerful and oppressive. And I actually think that Jolteon VMAX could be the best deck in format and could be very oppressive and just be like a absolute force to be reckoned with if it wasn't for its checks. And that's how I feel about each of the decks that have a red arrow going to them. I feel like if they didn't have this check in place, that they could just be the undisputed best deck in format. Now, I do feel like Shadowrider has that inherent power, but I don't have red arrows going to it because I feel like it is just very healthy. I think it feels almost fair right now because it has too many checks almost. Not only does it have the dark types of Umbreon VMAX and the Galarian Moltres that could be thrown into a myriad of decks, but it also has Suicune, which can out-trade it. It also has Path to the Peak plus Marnie. It has little things like that as well. It has the spread damage of decks like Jolteon, and you have to put down multiple VMAXs, so that hurts. It has even Rapidstrike Urshifu can sometimes take care of a Shadowrider because they need too many VMAXs, and you could just set up knockouts on both of them at the same time. So Shadowrider VMAX I don't have a red arrow pointing to, and there was a meticulous reason why, because I don't think it has just one or two little checks. I think it's actually a pretty healthy deck. I don't think it's oppressive. But the ones that have red arrows, I think those are the ones that could break the format and are being held together by those red arrows. So let's take a closer look at that. Removing the green arrows, these are the handful of decks and matchups and checks and balances that I think are kind of holding this format together and letting it be as versatile as it is. So let's start with Rapidstrike Urshifu VMAX, because that's the deck that we thought was just going to run amok. Now, like Shadowrider, I said it had multiple checks and balances. Rapidstrike Urshifu VMAX, it also has multiple checks and balances. Sure, there's decks that aren't playing support Pokemon on the bench, like Sylveon VMAX, Blaziken, stuff like that. It doesn't necessarily have the Sobbles and everything. Azashin Zamazenta has Zamazenta, but really what did it, I think, is Dragapult VMAX, because I think Urshifu can kind of overcome most of those other things. It can even overcome Shadowrider, like I mentioned. because Shadowrider has to put down multiple VMAXs, and sometimes you can get this telescopic sight Simeon back-to-back rapid flows and win the game with those 6 prizes. But I think Dragapult VMAX really just keeps Rapidstrike Urshifu in its place. As long as Dragapult VMAX has the possibility to just pop out and be the most popular deck, that is going to scare Rapidstrike Urshifu VMAX away at least a solid enough amount that the format is not overrun by Rapidstrike Urshifu VMAX and that other decks can survive. Whereas if Rapidstrike Urshifu VMAX was 40% of the meta and nothing could keep it in check, the meta would look different. There wouldn't be Jolteon, there probably wouldn't be Leafeon, there wouldn't be any decks that cannot run without their Sobbles and Drizzles on the board. I think it would look a lot different. Next, like I said, I think that Jolteon VMAX could actually have become the best deck in format at some point here, but I think we're always going to have both of the Urshifu decks, Single Strike and Rapid Strike, around to take care of Jolteon a little bit. So same thing. I think it's kept in check there. Suicune Ludicolo, kept in check by Jolteon VMAX, possibly kept in check by Rapid Flow decks as well, but I don't think it serves as much of the same purpose. But Jolteon VMAX is the thing scaring Suicune off right now. Dragapult VMAX could become an impressive force because of the way it chases down the support Pokemon, but Umbreon VMAX being a part of the metagame, and also just the general Moltres, Galarian Moltres V that can be in decks, that also scares it off a little bit. And then the big one here, the question is, why is Single Strike Urshifu Umbreon not just the best deck in format? It might be the best deck in format right now, might be the best performer, but why is it not a problem? Well, I think there's 2 main things that keep Single Strike Urshifu VMAX, Umbreon VMAX from being a problem. But first, that question comes up because, like I mentioned earlier, Single Strike Urshifu Umbreon really has no hard counter. It can't be hard countered by Zamazenta. It can't be hard countered by typing as of now because it's weak to Psychic and Grass. And it hits multiple things for weakness. It hits Jolteon for weakness. It hits Shadowrider and Dragapult for weakness. If it's playing against Grass, it can use Single Strike. If it's playing against Psychic, it can use Umbreon. And the Psychic Pokemon in the format are actually weak to Umbreon, so that's even better. It has 2 problems. One is its consistency. It has 3 stage 1s in the deck: Umbreon VMAX, Urshifu VMAX, and Houndoom. And Houndoom is there where other decks might have the Inteleon line or Shadowrider VMAX or Octillery, these supporting Pokemon that are going to get you cards. Whereas Houndoom accelerates energy, but it's not helping you draw more cards to get more options in your hand. And that's where Single Strike struggles. But it is inherently strong enough with these very powerful cards, Single Strike Umbreon, Urshifu, and Single Strike Energy, along with that energy acceleration of Houndoom, that it can function even though it's a little clunky at times, and you just have to play with what you have in your hand. You can't dig through the deck all the time. You don't always have all of your options available to you, so you have to minimize the options you have, just playing these 2 very strong aggressive attackers. And also, you do have a linear game plan sometimes, so I do think there are ways to capitalize on that aren't being capitalized yet. But the second thing, aside from consistency and lack of just searching what you want when you want it, that Single Strike has, is the Leafeon VMAX matchup. Leafeon VMAX hits Umbreon V and VMAX for weakness, and Single Strike Urshifu VMAX has 3 retreat, so Galar Mine plus Leafeon's attack with Galar Mine plus Urshifu's retreat cost does 300 and leaves just 2 Inteleon pings away from damage. But that's really never going to matter, because if the opponent Houndoomed 2 energy to Single Strike Urshifu VMAX, and that means Leafeon just one-shots it, and it one-shots Umbreon. So it kind of forces them to attack with the Single Strike Urshifu V, which is going to get one shot anyway, and they're putting resources onto a Pokemon that's always getting knocked out by the Leafeon. So that's kind of the matchup that keeps that in place. And then Leafeon doesn't really need to be kept in place by anything. It's just kind of a down the middle, pretty solid against a lot of things deck. It doesn't have awful matchups against really any of the top decks, and the only top deck that you feel like pretty good going into is the single strike matchup, which is still losable. So Leafeon VMAX is just kind of a consistent solid deck that I don't really think needs to be kept in check, and I've been saying that since before Evolving Skies was on PTCGO. I've been preaching that Leafeon VMAX is just a solid deck. I don't think it will get to the point, at least right now. I don't see any cards coming out in the future or decks. I don't think Leafeon VMAX will get to a point where it's the scary, oppressive deck. Oh my god, I can't play what I want because of Leafeon. But I think it serves a great purpose here by keeping the single strike Urshifu Umbreon deck in check. So how and why are lists changing? I think Cape of Toughness is causing more players to play Tool Scrapper and Tool Jammer. Dragapult VMAX Max Phantom plus Zigzagoon is causing some decks to change from the Rapidstrike Sobble to the 70 HP Sobble from Sword and Shield to better survive against Max Phantom plus Zigzagoon. And I think this is correct in decks where Keep Calling is a losing play. If you don't have energy acceleration, if Keep Calling means you're not attacking with your main attacker next turn because you used Keep Calling, then it's not worth it to play Keep Calling, and you should just run the 70 HP Sobble to be safer against Dragapult. Zamazenta V Dauntless Shield has caused some decks like Shadowrider and Leafeon VMAX to play Phoebe and Palpad or Phoebe and Eldegoss. And going into my predictions and how the meta might change. I think Zamazenta V Azashin V deck is just overdue to fall off. I said last week I thought it would be falling off. I'm saying again this week it should be falling off. I think it's a functioning deck. I think it's solid, but I think its results come from it being accessible and cheap. People know how to use it, and a lot of people playing it. I think it's pretty easy to counter, like I showed with my Blaziken VMAX Chinchino Path to the Peak build, which was just like a Zacian Zamazenta killer. That's what that deck was trying to do. So I do think this is a deck that could come back and be very strong for a meta call or something if people start to forget about it, but I think it's overdue to have a big fall off in the meta game. Leafeon VMAX, I think it's going to rise because of its single striker Urshifu Umbreon matchup, and I think healing options have already started to be explored. I saw that there was a 10th place list from the GG Tour tournament this past weekend with Pokemon Center Lady in it. My patron and coaching client Alex actually brought up Pokemon Center Lady to me last week in a coaching session. And players might try something like Lucky Ice Pop and Moo Cheese. And the reason I say these things is because it can help against spread decks to have this healing, specifically in Leafeon, because Leafeon already has that little bit of healing in Max Leaf, which heals 30 damage, and it's playing the Inteleon engine, so you could just search out these healing pieces whenever you need them. So I think Leafeon goes up, and players may start to experiment with healing a little bit more than they already have. And this one is a bit of a wild card, but if a deck like Single Strike Urshifu VMAX Umbreon is being played, and that is not a spread damage deck, that deck doesn't really have a great game plan against single prizers, except maybe try to use Houndoom a little more as an attacker. Leafeon VMAX doesn't have a great plan against single prize attackers. Shadowrider Calirex VMAX doesn't have a great game plan against single prize attackers. Suicune and Ice Rider don't really have great plans against single prize attackers. I should go back. I should backpedal and say Shadowrider in the early turns can Astral Barrage, but a lot of these decks that, especially Single Strike and Leafeon, which Single Strike is being played a ton and being very successful, and Leafeon is also coming up and it's good against that deck. They're pretty linear in the fact they don't spread damage and can take multiple knockouts on these smaller Pokemon. And Tapu Bulu hits Umbreon for weakness, Urshifu hits Dragapult and Shadowrider for weakness, Malamar hits both of the Urshis for weakness. I think single prize cards at least should be experimented with a little bit, and they might start showing their faces in the metagame. So that's my metagame analysis and my thoughts on the Pokemon TCG standard format as of September 28th, 2021. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for daily Pokemon TCG content if you have not already. Like I said, get your PTCGO codes at PoTownStore.com using code CELIO for 5% off, and you can check out all of my deck lists at PokemonCard.io. Consider becoming a patron of mine over at patreon.com/CeliosNetwork. And if you're interested in coaching, Pokemon TCG coaching, which I do gameplay analysis, deck building, any kind of Pokemon TCG help or advice you need, you can check out CeliosNetwork.com. Have a great day. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time here on Celios Network.